Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry we're getting started a little bit late. There's a lot going on today. We want to make sure we had the latest for you when we got this briefing going. I believe Mayor Lott and City Council President Reilly are on the line as well. Thank you for joining us, and we're gonna hear from Mayor Lott both in discussing the update on what's going on with the outbreak that started in Winooski, which is now spread to Burlington. And we also have some news on the airport to share. So let's, hi, welcome Mayor Lott. Thanks for being with us today. So, Olivia, why don't we go ahead and put up the slide deck. And
I'm having, 1 second, the slides will come back.
Okay. So as we shared at the governor's briefing this morning, as of last night, there were 62 cases associated with the outbreak in Winooski, 9 of which are now in Burlington. My understanding is that includes data from some of the testing this past weekend, but certainly not all of the testing that took place in the Burlington sites in the Old North End this weekend. We learned Friday morning, the city got confirmation past Friday morning of the first outbreak associated, the first Burlington confirmed positive associated with this outbreak. And we worked with the state to immediately set up a mobile testing site in the Old North End Community Center. And I think many of you have reported on the fact that was open through the weekend. Over 400 people were tested there over the course of the weekend. And I do appreciate the state moving quickly at our request to get that facility set up. I think they were able to do that while also maintaining testing going on at Waterman. And it was I think my understanding is Saturday may have been the highest number of tests done in the state. It was a very high number of tests. Dr. Levine told me it was over 1,800 tests were done that day. I think that's one of the highest days, maybe the highest day since the outbreak began. I'm not sure about that, but it was a lot of tests. And when you think about where our testing capacity was back in March, that's really an accomplishment that the state has that kind of resources to deploy quickly in a situation like this. And we know that, we've lived through it here in Burlington, right? We know that being able to deploy testing quickly when an outbreak starts in a defined community can be really important on the trajectory of that outbreak. So we appreciate that work. I want people to know that that testing is going to continue through the week, 9 to 2 every day. My understanding of how this is working is people can either just walk up or they can also register. And I think your wait times, if you do register at that link there on the screen, will be shorter. I also want to thank our fire department team that provided support and helped get that site set up. Chief Locke, our emergency services director, and fire chief personally was on site a lot of the weekend. And thank you to Champlain Housing Trust, which operates the Old North End Community Center, which was a great site for this kind of test, and they were very cooperative on how to get that set up. So if we could go to the next slide, Olivia. So I guess before talking about the local box sit-in plan, here are my thoughts, and I think Mayor Lott would like to share some of her thoughts as well on this outbreak. I see some encouraging news and some reasons for concern in what I just shared with you. What I think is encouraging is really just what I just said. I think that the state moved so quickly, that we have deployed these large numbers of tests. That makes me hopeful about the trajectory of this outbreak. In addition, I think it is good news that the state reports that so far no one over 64 has been tested positive so far, and that is encouraging. We know that the risks of death with this virus go up dramatically. We know that the risks of the virus go up dramatically. The older the population gets, and 65 is seen as something of a break point in that. So I find that encouraging. I'm certainly eager to get word of the additional tests. I'll feel much more confident that this outbreak has been fully defined and that we're getting our arms around it when we get the full tests back from the weekend's testing in Burlington. And the one other area that I've been in my conversations with Dr. Levine, and I think we communicated throughout the weekend. I lost track how many times we talked over the course of the weekend. My biggest concern is, and I've asked the state this directly, and I'm eager to get an answer on this. Are there any medically sensitive individuals living in these households? We know that the community impacted here has multi-generational households. I'm concerned about the possibility about there being older or medically vulnerable individuals living in these households where there are one or more COVID positive individuals. I think the right strategy in a situation like that is to offer and encourage medically sensitive individuals to get out of that household and to go to some kind of isolation site. And the state does have some facilities for that. And that is a strategy that I'm strongly encouraging. And I've asked that question of them: are there any individuals that fit that category? People that are medically sensitive living in these households that already have positives. Beyond that, I think even medically sensitive individuals from the community impacted here, and we do know that it is that a number of the positives have been within certain communities that overlap the Old North End and Winooski. And even if there are individuals from that group that are medically sensitive and are not in a COVID positive household, I want those individuals to be offered a chance to go to some kind of hotel site to get, as long as there's this elevated risk within this community. And that's the other thing that I've been really pushing and encouraging over the course of the weekend with the state. Of course, and I hope people sort of understand the responsibilities. The city doesn't have a health department. We rely on the State Department of Health, the Department of Health. There are cities that are bigger than Burlington that have their own health department. In recent years, city has become more and more involved in a variety of public health discussions with the opioid epidemic, homelessness, but we don't have our own health department. And so that's why, I'm explaining to you what we're doing in this way. It's because the city does not directly know the test results. We don't have the individuals involved. The state does, and we are strongly encouraging everything to be done to protect those potentially medically vulnerable individuals who are at a significantly elevated risk as a result of this outbreak so far. Maybe that's a good place for me to pause. Mayor Lott, would you like to share anything along those lines?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Weinberger. And we appreciate the joint advocacy. So we have also been discussing wanting to provide safe isolation for folks, make sure that they have food available to them in those scenarios as well. And are having daily discussions with our staff, members of your team, the Vermont Department of Health, and some local service provider organizations that work with some members of the community. Those calls have been happening daily since the beginning of the outbreak, and I'm encouraged by the collaborative and real-time problem solving I see happening. We were very pleased that the state is able to get testing on the ground rapidly after discovering some of these cases, and have been assured that testing resources will continue to be sent to our region as long as this need continues. I think to your point, making sure that folks have the resources to stay safe and protect themselves is really important, and something that we are leaning on the Department of Health for. And I would just add that for individuals, it is on all of us who live in the area to continue to be socially distant, wear masks, protect each other, and limit any, even small gatherings to outdoors. It's important not to be doing indoor gathering or going into other people's homes. So I just wanted to urge everyone focus on your role in protecting the community as we continue to live with COVID-19. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lott. And yeah, thank you for the collaboration. Since Friday, we have been, the two cities and the state have been having these calls in the morning, and it's been great working with you and your team, Mayor. And I think well said about the collective responsibility, and I'm going to have a little bit more to say about that in a minute. Let me go to an update on the Box It In plan for the return of students and others regarding June 1st. As we've talked before in these briefings, we know that many leases in this community turned over on June 1st, and that was a cause of a number of people, some hundreds of people coming back to Vermont from out of state and coming back to Burlington from out of state to start a new lease or relocate. And as we've been talking a lot in these briefings, we are working with Champlain College, with the University of Vermont, and with the state to really have a planned box it in strategy for, because this does represent an elevated risk. There is a real possibility of individuals who are coming from parts of the country all around us, the states all around us, where there have been elevated levels of infection, and bringing the virus with them. And we want them back here. We think they're an important part of this community, and students are a critical part of what Burlington is. And so I always want to make clear, I think UVM has set the right goal to be restarting in the fall if it can be done safely. But I think at the same time we have to acknowledge there's some risk with that, and so we have had this testing, isolation, tracing, and quarantine effort ongoing. And just a quick update on those 4 strategies. The testing has been going since June 3rd. It is continuing. It remains open. I walked by. I live only a block from that site, and went by it a number of times this weekend. And it was very busy. There were people coming in throughout the weekend. The National Guard is running this site. The Old North End site is over the weekend was run by the Department of Health. The National Guard has been running the Waterman site. There too, hundreds of people were tested over the course of the weekend, and that is going to continue to be a student-focused site through next Tuesday. We'll be open weekdays through next Tuesday, June 16th, to all students. And we're at the point now where a number of these students, we're on June 8th, right? So students who came back right around June 1 have reached the 7-day stage of the governor's quarantine order, which the way the governor's order works is you get back to the state, you're supposed to quarantine, which is a very strict level of isolating yourself in your property. And you're not supposed to go out for any reason except for medical emergency. And on day 7, anytime after day 7, you can get tested. And this site was set up so that testing could happen conveniently. And so we have a number of students who have now reached that threshold and should be going to get that test. The city, of course, has been doing these quarantine services, which to help students do this difficult thing of quarantining. And now we are helping facilitate, make sure students know how to get to this test site and get themselves tested. We have had more than 100 people sign up for that service, and the feedback we've been getting has been very positive, and it's been a good experience. I know a lot of Burlingtonians have been asking me since the start of this crisis, how do we help? We've got a bunch of volunteers involved in providing these supports, and so it's been a good experience for the volunteers. It's been a good experience for the students. We have anecdotally heard of at least one student who did test positive while receiving these quarantine services, which I find validating that this quarantine is actually, is having the intended effect with at least one individual of cutting off a potential virus before it spreads in the community. And that's the idea here. So it's a big week for this. Once we get to June 17th, then the site is going to be open to all residents through advanced registration and signups. But for the next week, it's going to be very focused on the students to fill out this box it in June 1 strategy. So that's the update there. And then, so I want to kind of just share a few thoughts on these two things together and kind of where we are now, because I think it's important for people to understand, we've been in a very good place, as I've talked numerous times on this briefing. And, Olivia, I don't know if you're able to, people who have been tuning into these briefings have seen us put up this COVID Act Now map numerous times. We often look at it on Wednesdays when Dr. Leffler is here, which has shown Vermont shimmering green, even as the rest of the country with very little other green spots on the map. And we consistently have been there for weeks. And that is a sign that it's a function of the fact that there have been very low levels of the virus in the community since mid-April. But we got a number of things that are going on now. This is a dynamic, fluid situation. There are people coming back potentially carrying the virus. There is this outbreak that we've been talking about. There's the general loosening that's been going on. And it is, I do think it's, for the first time since the reopening began, I think it's important to acknowledge that the risk level has risen modestly. And you can see that if you go to that COVID Act Now map. Vermont, for the first time in weeks today, is yellow, which is like their lowest level of concern. There's an orange and there's a red, but it is an indication that the activity of the virus has ticked up a little bit, and people should be aware of that and conscious of that. Olivia, if you could advance here, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. We've talked, and I heard Dr. Levine mention this earlier today. This is a time to, I think, be even more mindful of these things that we all can do. As Mayor Lott said, we all have a certain responsibility here, and it is, I think, worth repeating these strategies that need to be a part of our life now: the hand washing, the physical distancing or barriers, wearing of face masks. Very effective strategy, and the daily screenings. I want to kind of add something to the conversation today beyond, we've sort of talked around this before, but we have this great analytics team within the city that is constantly kind of scouring the globe, looking at communities that are a little bit ahead of us in this reopening, looking at what's working, what's not elsewhere in the world. And in some of the areas that are doing better, there is a real focus on what we're going to start calling the 3 C's. Again, there's nothing earth-shattering and new here, but I think they're thinking about it in this way. The 3 C's is new for me, and I found it helpful. So I'm going to share it here with you as we all kind of grapple with this. The 3 C's are closed spaces with poor ventilation, crowded places with many people nearby, and close contact settings, such as areas where you're for an extended period of time in close contact with someone else less than 6 feet away. When you can limit your exposure in these 3 areas, that's advisable. When you particularly should think hard about putting yourself in a situation where you're going to have all 3 of those things going on at once: indoors, close to others, and in close and in a significant crowd. When you are in these settings, it's particularly important to exercise caution and to exercise those virus control strategies that I just went through. Those are the settings where there's the greatest risk, and those are the areas where I'm encouraging people to be most mindful of their role in keeping themselves safe and importantly, not spreading the virus to other members of the community, in particular vulnerable members of the community. So I think that is what we have to say about the outbreak and the current status of the virus here. We're now going to move on, and this is really why, additionally, in addition to having Mayor Locke here to talk about the outbreak, we want to talk about some important news at the airport. There's been a pretty robust discussion in recent weeks and months, and frankly, there have been some calls for this over the years, but it's really intensified of late. People that want of this desire for sound monitoring equipment around the airport. I think it comes as a surprise to many people to know that for all the discussion of sound impacts of the F-35s and sound issues in general at the airport, all of those discussions are based on modeling, based on computer modeling. They are not rooted in, up until now, they have not been rooted in sort of ongoing sound monitoring. And there have been many questions asked about that over time. There's been a desire, and I'm sympathetic to this, and it's intuitively, I think, makes kind of common sense. Computer models have a role; they're important, but it would be great if we could kind of reality check those computer models with actual conditions on the ground. And what has stood in the way of that happening up until now, my understanding, and I think we do have Aviation Director Gene Richards and Nick Longo that can zoom in here too if they have anything to add to this. But really, it is resource intensive to do a good job with sound monitoring. And the airport has limited resources. It's a small regional airport with a modest annual budget, and it's we've been working our way out of financial challenges for years there. We're doing much better than we were a decade ago, but we still have our challenges. And so that's really been the main constraint. Last week, the airport took two important steps towards making the actual on-the-ground monitoring possible. And first of all, we've submitted a grant application to the FAA seeking 100% funding to install these noise monitors throughout Burlington, South Burlington, and Winooski. This is estimated at a $1.68 million investment, and we are hopeful that there's a way for the federal government to make that entire investment and none of that cost to fall on local communities. And we appreciate the support of City Council President Helen Reilly and Mayor Christine Lott in developing and submitting this application, and I'll let them share their thoughts on it in a moment. Second, if this grant is not successful, we have asked the Vermont National Guard to design, implement, and operate a noise monitoring system on its own that would be funded by the U.S. Department of Defense or the Vermont National Guard. So we're hopeful about the FAA grant. If that doesn't work, we have this fallback request that we are also hopeful about. So with that, Mayor Lott, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Mayor Weinberger. Excited to join the two of you to make this announcement. We've been having these discussions for so long. We went through the public input process last year after the noise map was released, and our community, our residents in Winooski, really advocated for this monitoring alongside home insulation. And want to share appreciation for our three cities working together, also for airport staff for continuing to work diligently at this and find creative ways to try to move this forward. To your point about limited resources, having these two asks as different methods to make this come to fruition is great. I know there are quite a few residents in my town that are probably watching this. We'll watch it later. We'll be very excited and looking forward to continuing to advocate together to try to bring this to the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Lott. President Reilly, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for including me. I think this is a great step forward. I want to thank both of you for meeting so regularly so we really could share our concerns, understand each other's perspectives. And as in most things, I think when you meet face to face and talk candidly, but thoughtfully and not in a hyped up environment, you really can move forward and find common ground. I also want to really give a lot of credit to Gene Richards and Nick Longo and his whole team. They have been quite creative, I think. They have been persistent and continually, I think, trying to push the envelope with the FAA. I can remember very early conversations with Gene when the answer he gave us that was given to him by the FAA was, you can't do that. And I think our joint meetings and conversations and certainly some of the interests of all of our residents from all three communities have allowed them to, I guess, feel confident and committed to continually going back till they get a yes. And so I think this submittal is really positive. If we don't get the grant, I think it's marvelous to go for 100%, because that was quite a stumbling block, I think, in the past. I fully support asking the National Guard in the Air Force to help fund this, because as we all know, the real noise generator that ups the level so high and impacts residents of all of our communities. I'm hearing from Burlingtonians who are saying, whoa, these jets really are loud. So I think it's the military jets that are driving the sound, and I'm happy that we're willing to kind of push that envelope and engage in a conversation with them and see if that can happen. So, you know, thank you all for being persistent and working. And, you know, I appreciate the leadership on your part, Mayor Weinberger, as well as the team at the airport. So thank you. And this is, it's not a dream come true, but I think it's getting information that's really helpful for people. And then we can figure out what the next moves are, if any. So thank you.
Well, thank you, President Reilly, and appreciate how. Let me be the third to say the partnership with both of you and before you, Mayor Lott, your predecessor, Mayor Leonard, over years now. I think for 3-4 years now, we have been having these regular meetings to work together on airport issues, and I think I want to just echo, I do sense that our communities have come quite a distance as a result of those discussions from where things were, where there had been some elevated kind of tensions between the different municipalities about airport issues. And I appreciate the time, the personal time each of you have put it into this effort to change the conversation. And let's hope we'll get good news on this, and that we can chalk this up as a joint success alongside, I think, other meaningful improvements on the ground that have come out of this collaboration include the saving of the Kirby Lane, the Kirby cottages on Lily Lane in South Burlington that were slated for demolition. Those homes are now being added back into the market. And that was something, President, really appreciate your partnership on making that happen. And yes, I'm very hopeful that as a result of all the conversations and having the skillful staff we do at the airport, that where the noise program is headed is going to be one that instead of, hopefully we've seen the last of the removal of homes anywhere in our 3 cities. We can't afford to remove any more homes. We need to be going the other direction. We need more homes. We don't have nearly enough homes in this community. We don't want to see any more taken down. This sound program that we are working on now, instead of being focused on demolition, will be focused on improving those homes, insulating them better, putting in better windows, putting in air conditioning systems. Similarly, we're pursuing some opportunities with school buildings so that we can really improve our buildings to deal with the noise levels in the area around the airport. And thank you for your partnership on those issues as well. Jean, I think you are with us. Is there anything you want to share, Jean, at this point, or do we say it all?
Hang on, Mayor. I'm adding Jean into the meeting. Jean, you should be able to enable your microphone now if there's anything you'd like to add.
Hi there.
Hey, Jean.
Thank you all. I'm sorry about that. Sometimes this doesn't work as well as it should. Anyhow, thank you all for your patience. And, Nick and I and the team here have really enjoyed trying to deal with this challenge. And it has been stressful and challenging to try to get it right. But your patience and your direction and partnership has really benefited this situation, and it allowed the creativity to think outside the box and to get to where we are today. Regardless of the outcome, we're very committed to this partnership and to continuing working with you. And I'm very happy, that what we did is we took bits and pieces of other grants and we put them together. And there's always a chance. And but we're on board with you, and we're bound and determined to work forward and see what we can get to, make this process better. So thank you for your patience and your partnership, and really appreciate it. And thank you, Mayor, for your direction.
All right. Well, thank you, Jean. And I like the way President really said it, that it's the FAA basically said, you can't do that. Gene Richards, when he hears a challenge like that he doesn't hear that as a hard no. It's a challenge to find a way to overcome a hurdle. And you and your team has done that again and again out there. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you.
I think we have one more. Do we have one more topic? Yes. I did want to just update public on so there's a lot of interest in City Place, Burlington, and we have after the last council executive session in May on this, and after talking with the council about where we were headed, I sent a letter to BTC Mall Associates, the developer, attempting to kind of, just basically to acknowledge that, like everything else, the project has been impacted by COVID-19, and to try to reset expectations between the city and the developer and the public about progress at City Place Burlington. And we have requested a series of steps over the next 2 months, and I'm happy to say that the developer has agreed to these steps. And here I'm going to list the steps for you, and then also we'll post the letters from me to the developer and the developer's response. We'll share that publicly afterwards so that people can see that directly. But here's what we've requested and they've agreed to. We think it is time to get the development agreement updated. Clearly, the development agreement that exists between us and is still a binding document between the parties is not consistent in terms of dates and a whole number of other details with where the project is after 2 years of delays and changes in scope. It is time to renegotiate that agreement and put a new agreement in place. And we've targeted the end of July as the goal for when those negotiations will be done, and we'll be able to bring to the council a new or an updated agreement for approval. People may remember that last fall, I requested and the developer took a number of steps to restore the city's public right-of-way. They did not completely restore the right-of-way now, though, at the time, and we worked with them to. There was additional costs involved, and there was some reasons they could only partially restore it at the time. We have now requested. We're really demanding that they fully restore the right-of-way along Bank Street and Cherry Street, and they have taken steps to get that work done. It's quite a bit of work involved in the additional steps, and that will be taking place over the next couple months. The developers are going to come back and give a public update. It's been a while since they've given a public update. They're working on a number of things. They have committed to come back and give a complete update at the August 3rd City Council meeting. They are going to actively participate in the various efforts that the city has ongoing to support businesses in the downtown during the pandemic and the recovery. They have agreed to be really part of those discussions. I see this as a indication that they that they see themselves as part of this community for the long haul, and that their success with this property will depend on the downtown bouncing back from this economic this recession that we're in, and they will be part of those discussions going forward. And then finally, they have agreed to continue to pay through the end of this month. Something they pay all the city's expenses related to their delay. So something I think is important for people to understand. The city has had some modest costs as a result of the delays. They really have revolved around project management costs and legal fees. Brookfield, since the delays began almost 2 years ago, have consistently paid for those costs month after month, and they have agreed to continue to do so. I think they owe us that as a result of their non-conformance with the original schedule and the original agreement, and they've agreed to that. And so I want Burlingtonians to know that it has not been their tax dollars that have been paying for that delay. As far as what happens after the end of this month, after June, that will be an issue negotiated in this new development agreement. So it may well, that's something that we expect to have further conversations about. So those last couple bullets just sort of summarize what I already said. And I'm glad to have clarity about what the near-term goals are, and our team will be focused on doing everything the city can do on its side to ensure that those goals are met. With that, I think that's the prepared briefing that we had, and happy to answer some questions. Want to start here in the room? Ross, go ahead.
So my question is related to the budget. I know that there's those conversations are beginning now. Would you support a plan like is being discussed in other cities, and that some city councilors say they're supportive of stripping some funding from the Burlington Police Department to put towards other city services, whether that's housing or various social workers and programs such as that?
Yeah, well, yes. And in fact, we've already done a bunch of that, right? So I'm definitely open to this discussion. In fact, the police budget in recent years has moved in that direction significantly. We have a social worker that sits right down the hallway from the chief and works on the opioid heads up our response to the opioid epidemic. We have non-sworn officers, people with social service backgrounds, community affairs officers that instead of sending police officers out to talk with people who are they're living in encampments or in some cases having mental health issues, we do have these non-officer personnel that we deploy. So we've had this for many years. I think this is an area that Burlington really has been a leader for a long time. We for decades, we've had this street outreach team, which is a way for, instead of the police to be the first to respond to something going on Church Street or the surrounding neighborhoods, we send people with different kinds of skills and backgrounds than the police. So this is something we've been doing a long time. And I'm definitely, I'm definitely open to going further in this direction. And I think in the budget discussion last week, we heard Chief Morrison herself, acknowledge clearly that it would be great if the police didn't have to do everything that we rely on them to do currently. That the police are who responds when there's no one else to do the job. And if we can find a way to resource, to keep moving in this direction and find more ways to resource other professionals so that they can respond instead of the police, and then perhaps over time we could actually thus need less police. I think that'd be an outcome I would welcome. And you heard last week that the chief herself would welcome it. We had already were in discussions about expanded street outreach before the pandemic hit. We had some efforts, other efforts to explore in this direction ongoing, and I think this sort of incredible national reckoning that we're having in the wake of George Floyd does add urgency to those discussions. And I will say, as I finalize my budget, I'm thinking very, I think there's an opportunity here to make progress in this direction, and we're looking hard at that. And I certainly expect that my budget that I submit to the City Council at the end of this week will do everything that we can, given the enormous financial constraints we have right now in the middle of this recession with city revenues down 16%. We're going to look for ways to continue to innovate in this upcoming budget. I'll have more detail on that when we release this budget at the end of the week. Yes.
Mayor, I wanted to ask you about UVM students coming back to campus. I've heard, some concerns. Students are saying they see more Burlington police officers near campus in their residential communities. And I've heard different things from it being part of the city's COVID-19 response to the university paying for the patrols. Can you just, give some clarity as to why they might be seeing more officers?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. There shouldn't be any mystery about it. I mean, we laid this all out in one of these briefings, and we've talked about it a couple times in these briefings. This is one of the strategies of this box it in plan related to June 1st is to use these patrols, which these patrols have a long history in the city now. For 8 years, more than 8 years, we've been doing these patrols pre-COVID for quality of life reasons. This was something that was a strategy that evolved from long years of frustration about elevated noise levels, large parties in residential neighborhoods. And 8 years ago, UVM agreed to pay for the Burlington Police on a handful of weekends over the course of the year, weekends that we can look at the data and see year after year there are we can look at the data and see year after year that there are more disruptions, more police calls on these weekends. Those are the weekends that these additional patrols have been deployed, and they, I got to say, until the last couple of weeks, I never heard a complaint about them from students. And furthermore, they have been very successful year after year in achieving the goals that they were designed for, and that noise disturbances, complaints from residents about quality of life have gone down year after year after year after year throughout that period. And that's sort of the background on this. The idea was we could deploy this same kind of patrol in the weekends right after June 1, when students were coming back, to less about the noise, but to make sure that there were not gatherings that were out of compliance with the governor's order, that there be the first weekend no more than 10 people gathered that were not in one household, and then that the governor has raised that restriction to 25. So that was the thinking, and this is a tool that we have established in this community for protecting quality of life in these neighborhoods, and working with students. And a lot of the interactions are kind of educational interactions there, and they don't result in necessarily I think arrests are quite rare. There are tickets that come out of some of these historically, but a lot of times it's just a case of there being conversations between officers and students, and that's the history on it. And the thinking was that could help in this public safety challenge, and that's why I've had them for the last couple of weeks. And I think as we we wouldn't typically be doing these patrols this time of year. But that's why we've done them. So that's the background, and that's why they're happy.
Just one quick follow-up.
Yeah.
For students who might have heard this and might still feel some sensitivity, especially with what's going on nationwide, just seeing more police in their communities, or anything you might say to them about that?
Yeah, no, I understand that reaction, certainly given the national conversation that we're having and the conversation that we're grappling with, how to make the Burlington Police Department as good a department as possible. And I hope knowing that source, that reason for some students is reassuring that this is a response that's being driven by a public health response. And I think the other thing that I hope reassures students is that this is not something that's going to continue indefinitely. This was set up for this very specific June 1 boxed it in plan, and now that we're kind of moving into towards the second half of June, this will be winding down, and it will not be something that they have to endure much. It will not be something they have to they will not be seeing these patrols on this basis going forward in the same way.
Thank you.
Mayor, just
Yes.
a quick follow-up. You said that there have been 9 cases from the Winooski outbreak, I believe, that are in Burlington now.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel a little funny calling it the Winooski outbreak, but I say it that way just to be clear. The first case is related to this epi-linked group of infections. Was more than a week ago. They were initially, for the first few days, only found in Winooski. Friday was the first day that we had a confirmed single case in Burlington. That is now up to 9 as a most recent data we have, and I do think there'll be an update on this soon. That is up to 9, and 9 in 4 different households, is my understanding.
But they have connection with the Winooski.
That is what we understand from the state and their epi team, is that every time there's an infection, the contact tracers get to work, and our understanding is there is a linkage between all of these infections.
And also, if there are any in any other surrounding communities.
I think I don't want to misstate this, but I think if you look at, Dr. Levine in the morning press conference spoke to this explicitly. There were a handful that were not from Burlington or Winooski. Not many, but a few that were from outside of Burlington or Winooski.
One quick follow-up on
Yeah.
that. You also mentioned about you thought people should be able to go to hotels, if they are in high risk categories. Do you know if anyone has taken advantage of that?
Yeah, that's right. There's two populations, and I want to be clear about this. There's two populations I'm concerned about. In both cases, what I'm worried most about are the medically sensitive individuals, either people that are over age 65 or have some other kind of chronic underlying health condition. If there are any of those individuals, and I don't know if there are, I've asked that question, and I hope the state is, I believe the state is focused on this. If there are any individuals that fit that definition that are living in the households that we know have COVID exposure, that there are one or more individuals who have already tested positive, though I think it's really important that we offer and encourage, and in some cases, because of language barriers, that encouragement has been challenging, but it's not something that has been a major part. People who've been watching these briefings know that I've been talking about isolation as a key strategy for months. It has not been a major part of America's response or Vermont's response so far. We had an isolation facility over the Holiday Inn, but very few people actually went there. These are people that I really think we should try to get them isolated. They've probably been exposed to the virus. They may not have it yet. We should get them into a place where they are no longer at daily risk of being infected by one of their family members. The other group that I am concerned about are, people in the geographic area and in the social networks that seem to be at risk in this virus, in this outbreak, that there have been no positives in that household yet, but they are in the community and they are individually high risk themselves. I think we work through the weekend to have the state offer vouchers to those individuals, and I am unclear what the status at this point. I know that there's agreement that is a strategy that could be useful here, and that the state is trying to implement that. I don't know at this point whether the status of all those conversations and whether anyone has taken that up yet, but that is that's another group that I'm concerned about here, and I think we should be doing everything we can to protect that group.
Thank you.
Mayor, we do have a number of questions online as well.
Okay, go ahead.
The first question is from Aiden Quigley at VT Digger, and I will read Aiden's question for him.
Okay.
His question is, have the municipalities come to an agreement on the 10% local match for the FAA's wider noise mitigation program?
We've come to an agreement in a formal MOU that I'm pretty sure everybody has signed off on this point. It's been a while since we talked about it, but correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor Lott or President Riley, I think all three communities have approved this agreement now that says we're going to work together to try to find a way, just like we've done with this sound monitoring situation, where that 10% local match requirement does not fall to the any of the local municipalities or the airport, because we're talking about over time what is expected to be a very substantial amount of money that could, we believe you could have as much as this is on the high side, it may well not be this much, but as much as $5 to $10 million a year could be going into this program. The local match would be substantial. I don't think any of the municipalities or the airport could easily find a way to directly fund a local match of that magnitude. So the most promising area that work is ongoing is there are already state monies available and utility monies available for really the work that is involved in sound insulation is really, to a large degree, identical to the work involved in weatherization, and there's a lot of weatherization funds that already exist. We're trying to confirm before the grant is nailed down that will be a way for essentially existing state programs to fund some or all of the local match requirements. To the degree that is not sufficient, we have a number of other ideas that we're pursuing as well. And I am optimistic that we will be able to find a way to either eliminate or greatly mitigate any burden on the local municipalities or the airport that will be needed to with respect to the local match, and that we'll be able to move forward full speed with these improvements and do that in a way that is not a major burden on any of the municipalities or the airport. There's still some time to sort out the details of that. This is something that is being finalized in the coming months, but we're working together on that, and I appreciate the partnership with South Burlington and Winooski on instead of, I think it's a great, on that issue as much as any, instead of there being tension between the communities over these issues, here's one where through a formal agreement, we're all kind of on the same side of the table trying to find resources to deal with this joint common challenge. And I'm hopeful now that we're aligned like that, that we're going to be able to get it done.
And Jean, Mayor Lott, and Chair Reilly did have to jump off at 3.
Okay.
But I think we do have a few more questions about this. And next up is
I'm on my own on this now, so okay.
That's what I was saying. Next up is from Courtney Lambden at 7 Days. And
yes.
Oh, Courtney, Zoom is not letting me enable your microphone. I will try promoting you to a panelist. Let's see if this works.
Hey, Courtney. Yep.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for letting me in, Olivia. So yeah, Mayor, I had just a question for you. How will this noise monitoring equipment be used if Burlington does get it? How does it work? Will the data be released to the public? I have a couple follow-ups, so maybe you can start there.
So, now I'm going to, it's unfortunate that we don't have Nick or Jean here still to provide some of the detail. I may need to have them follow up with you, Courtney, with some of the detail. I mean, my understanding is it would be ongoing sound monitoring effort that would give us more information to work with to understand exactly what practices and what methods that the Guard is using, primarily, perhaps other users, how to give us sort of on the ground real-time information about what those impacts are and whether any of the different maneuvers or different uses of the airplane, different approaches can have a meaningful impact on mitigating those sound measures. That's been the history here, that the Guard has for decades attempted to limit the impacts they have. They've changed flight patterns, they've changed their afterburner use, they've changed the angle with which they climb when they come out of the airport. They did all that in the F-16 era, and they expressed a desire to continue that. They expressed an intent, more than a desire, a commitment to continue that with the F-35s. And I think these would be tools that would give some data to inform those changes in practice.
And Mayor, I did realize Nick is still
here.
Able
Great.
to be here. So Nick, I've added
welcome.
Nick into the meeting if you're able to jump in at any point, Nick.
Nick, what else can you share about how we use this?
And Nick, I think you will need to unmute on your end as well. Are you there, Nick?
There we
yes,
go.
Great.
Hey. Sorry about that. And I think Gene is on as well in his office.
Oh, Gene is back on too. Great.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I did not.
So 7 days, Courtney Landon is asking, can you give some additional detail on how the sound monitoring equipment will be used, what benefits will flow to the community from having this additional capacity? I spoke already about my understanding that, the Guard has made this commitment to operate as best they can in ways that mitigate sound impacts on different neighborhoods. And this equipment could inform some of those practices and, perhaps, change the way that their angle of takeoff, how they approach the airport, that kind of thing. Are there other uses that you can speak to?
Yeah, there are, and I think you explained it well earlier, talking about the confirmation of what our noise exposure maps look like today. So when we created those maps under FAA regulation and using our consultant, we used the data provided not only in the environmental impact statement of the Air Force, but also the updated data collection from actual radar tracks within our noise exposure map. So this noise monitoring equipment will do exactly what you mentioned earlier. We'll be able to confirm what our noise exposure map actually details out. Now it's important to know that the maps generally don't change. The maps are confirmed, and we might be able to update the track data or the radar data associated with those maps, but we'll also be able to get what's called single event data. So we can actually see what that one particular aircraft on an arrival or departure performs. And then, like you said, confirm what the maps detail out.
Sorry, just to jump in. So what happens if they don't confirm what the maps have projected? For example, what if the planes are louder than what the models have predicted? What happens then?
Then that's a useful tool for us as an airport sponsor and the FAA to rerun the noise exposure map. The noise exposure map is, like we mentioned, is a computer modeled system using radar data and things like that. However, that's the only regulated way to implement any noise mitigation plan. So the data from the noise monitoring systems will confirm, will be able to be used to eventually guide us to a new noise exposure map. However, noise exposure maps are computer modeled as regulated by the FAA.
Thank you.
And Courtney, I mean, just to kind of connect the dots there, like these noise exposure maps have on the ground implications that I spoke before of Kirby Cottages. Kirby Cottages faced one fate when they were on one side of what the noise modeling maps showed. When we got the updated maps with the F-35s, there's actually less impacts on Kirby Cottages than under the F-16s. And so they got a different status. And because they got that shift in status, they now are going back on the market, and there'll be families living in them again. If there's a change in the noise exposure maps, that could increase the number of people that we could help with this new sound insulation system. It would help us ensure that the households that are getting these potentially tens of thousands of dollars of benefits are the ones that should get these benefits. If there was something kind of wrong in the model, it could help us make sure that the people who are actually most impacted by the noise are actually receiving the help that they should get, and help us prioritize within those who are having the most impact, so that they get the help first. So it should be a tool that helps, on the ground, how we mitigate impacts. It gives us another tool for doing so and ensuring fairness.
Thank you.
Our
Back
next
to you,
question.
Olivia. Anybody else?
Yes. Next question is from Liam at VPR. Liam, you should be able to enable your microphone.
Yes. Hi, Mayor. I just was wondering about City Place, and I think there are likely some delays in the project now, and I'm wondering how confident are you that Brookfield will still be able to realize the project for that space?
So, I think, Liam, the last few months have been a reminder for all of us of the risks and uncertainty that is a fact of life, and I think that's been on more display with this pandemic than sometimes it is. So I can't sit here and give you absolute certainty about where things are headed. I do find it encouraging. I think it is good news that Brookfield is publicly committing in these letters to attempt to come to a new agreement. I think if we are successful with that, that will be a meaningful, even in advance of actually seeing dirt starting to move and concrete starting to go in the ground. A new development agreement will be a meaningful step, making good on what they have said publicly many times, that they're committed to a transformational redevelopment of that site. I can tell you that this is not news. We have said this for some time. In recent months, we have been getting the highest level of engagement from Brookfield in terms of highest level personnel that we have ever had over the last 2 years. And this new team working on it it's been a meaningful, it's been a materially better team that we've been working with. So I find all that encouraging. I find their public statements that they still are committed to this encouraging. I find this letter where they're indicating that they're going to work with us in good faith to have a new agreement in place that is updated to the situation we face. I find that encouraging, but we wouldn't be being straight with people if we didn't acknowledge, obviously this project has not gone as it was supposed to the last couple of years. And there's certainly now is maybe more than ever the real uncertainty about exactly how it does go forward, given what's going on in the economy. I will continue to fight to protect Burlington's interests in that, fight to continue to protect Burlington financially, as we have since the start. As I mentioned some examples of that with the Brookfield paying for our out-of-pocket costs. We'll continue to advocate for the city's interests as we go forward.
Is a project like this still something that you think Burlington needs? I mean, one that's a mixture of retail, some office space, a hotel, apartments. I mean, we're seeing an economic situation where businesses are struggling right now, and it's uncertain how and when the economy is going to be getting better, if UVMMC will still need that office space. I mean, do you think that this is still a kind of project that can actually be successful in Burlington?
I think that's a fair question, Liam, and I think it's certainly possible. I'm not announcing a change, but I think it's certainly possible that the market that exists as we come out of the pandemic is different locally than the economy that existed going into the pandemic, and that could result in further changes to the scope of this project and to what is planned. I believe the need for housing is as great as it's ever been, and I don't expect that to change. Whether other elements of the project might have to change as a result of this incredible financial turmoil, it's possible.
Thank you.
I do, I think it's important for us to remember whatever becomes the right programmatic mix as we come out. And that may well be what was discussed. I don't mean to be suggesting that I'm aware that there are changes. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think we are better positioned for a rebuilding of those 3 blocks now than we were before this mall, which was failing, and which did not have a future in that form. It is good that building is gone, and it puts us in better position to get to where we need to be in that part of the downtown, that the obstacle of that building is no longer there. And that it happened without the city paying for any of that removal, any of that demolition, means that the city didn't, that was an expense that Burlington and taxpayers didn't have to make, and it puts us closer to getting the right mixed use neighborhood there, that we are where we are, as opposed to not having gone forward.
And I just wanted to clarify that you said you're not aware of any changes, but you're saying that it's not something that would surprise you. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I just the pandemic, everything that's happened since March has been a cataclysmic economic event. We have seen tens of millions of Americans lose their job, tens of thousands of Vermonters lose their jobs. There's some encouraging signs that the economy may bounce back as we come out of this, but we're in the very early days of that. There's a real possibility of a prolonged economic downturn. We know that there have been severe financial strains put on the retail sector, put on the restaurant sector, put on hospitals, put on UVMC. It would be, so given all of those things, it would not shock me if, as we emerge from this, there need to be further changes. But again, what Brookfield has said is that they remain committed to a transformational project. I expect they're going to come and say that themselves on August 3rd. I want them to be, they're the developers here. They're the ones that actually own the property. They're the ones that have to invest the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be necessary to transform those blocks. The city's role in that is modest and limited to the public improvements, and the investments the city makes are on the backside of this. They're the ones that should be communicating where this is headed, and that's why I'm glad to have them publicly committed to come and give a fulsome update on August 3rd. And I do expect they should be in position to answer your questions that you're raising here, Liam, at least better than I'm able to, given the city's limited role here on August 3rd.
Will you advocate for them changing the project? I mean, you're at the table with them to some degree. I mean, would you say, like, listen, retail's not looking great right now, you should put in more apartments? Is that something that you're doing right now?
We have, and it's a matter of public record, throughout this process, I've advocated strongly to keep the downtown jobs, and advocated to them and advocated to the hospital that they keep their longstanding commitment to downtown jobs. I am advocating to Brookfield currently the need for housing. I want to make sure that as they are figuring out how to get through this incredibly challenging period, that they are fully aware of the enormous need for housing in this community, and that they have all the tools to address that need at their disposal. And I'm encouraged they are thinking about how to build housing more. They're doing. I know they're working hard on the housing side of this, and I'm encouraging that, and I want them to build as many homes as they can as we come out of this. So yeah, I am engaged in those discussions, feel very strongly we need the housing, we need the downtown jobs. At the same time, I am a pragmatist, and I think it would be wrong for the city to take an overly rigid position on what they do with their property. If they want to talk about changes as a result of this emergency and the new reality, I'll be open to hearing them out on that.
Great. I really appreciate all the time there.
Yeah, thank you, Liam.
All right, I think that is all the questions we have, which is good timing because Mayor, I know that you have to be somewhere else at 3:30.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you again. We'll be back. Our plan is to have another briefing on Wednesday. Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks.